run, run, Mona, run, bright angel above. Oh, run, run, Mona, run, bright angel above. If I just had your wing, bright angel above. If I just had your wing, bright angels above. I'd fly away to the kingdom, bright angel above. It'd fly away to the kingdom, bright angels above. Angel, lend me your wing, bright angels above. Angel, lend me your wing, bright angels above. Escape for your life, bright angel above. Escape for your life, bright angels above.
She had to have on a dressy dress because she was just coming from church. What they did to her, they didn't need to live.
Recy loved to go to church. She'd go to church every chance she get. And Miss Fanny was basically the same way. Miss Fanny's son, Wes, wasn't a church goer, but he just went along for protection. It was about 2 miles walk they had to walk that night. They had revival going on at the Holiness Church. There's a lot of singing, they have prayer, and after a while the preacher get up and bring the word. It'd be very hot because there was no air conditioning or fans in that church at that time. They had to raise the windows. And the church was well attended. Wasn't seats for all the people. Some had to stand up. You know, the Pentecost people, they like to get up and dance a little bit on the floor. So I don't know if that was Ref Recy done it that night.
Recy just loved to go to church, and she was more Christian than we were, than the rest of our sisters and brothers were. She was more Christian-like. But that night when that happened to her, she was at a holiness church, as they call it, a sanctified church. That's where she was coming from. That's where Recy was coming from. They said that she was a prostitute at that time, and that's the reason why they picked her up and all that stuff. But she wasn't a prostitute. My sister was a Christian person. Yeah. And she was married and had a baby. But the things that they claimed that she were, she wasn't that.
It was a kind of warm night. It was September the 3rd, you know, it was still hot here in Alabama.
This bitter earth.
They were walking at night, and at that time the streets were very poorly lit.
What the fruit it bears.
There was mad foxes, rabbit foxes. So Wes had his stick with him. It was very unusual for anybody to get attacked by somebody else here in Abbeville.
This bitter earth.
Well, these boys that that took her that night. They had circled the church a couple times. And about about 8 o'clock, they decided to go down. They made a mistake and went to a lady's house named Rose Jordan and Sam Jordan. They had 2 daughters, and the daughters were about 17 and 18. Each one of them had a daughter, Sam and Rose. And they were gonna pick those girls up, take off with them, but they picked on the wrong family there, because Sam Jordan and Rose Jordan was 2 rough women that you didn't want to mess with. And they chased these guys away. And so they kept circling around, and they knew about what time the church was out at night, and they wouldn't bother them until they got, about at least a half a mile out of town. And that's when they passed Recy and Miss Fanny and West, and then they come back, and then they pass, and then they come back, and then they finally stopped behind them, and that was when Herbert Levitt got out in the car with the gun. She decided to run away right away. As soon as she saw the gun and they yelled to her to get in the car, she started to run away. And she couldn't run but a very short distance because there was a tall fence there. And she could have got past that fence. She could have went into the woods below there, but she couldn't.
And Miss Fanny told her not to run. Said, don't run, said, because they might shoot you. And so she went and got in the car with them, and she said they blindfolded her. And they took her away.
Well, Wes was scared because they had the gun there. And I don't think he was couldn't defend them against 7 guys. It was 7 of them. So Wes basically went along with what Miss Fanny says, that is, try to let them do what they said do. Maybe they'll go on. They was interested in her because Recy was a very nice looking young lady at the age of 24.
He tried to get me not to go to church that night. That's because I got a baby. I think she was 9 months old. And I wanted to go so bad. So he said, you could go ahead. I stay here and keep the baby. Saw the car pulled up behind me. Some white boys. They had a gun. And told me they were going to shoot me if I run. If you don't stand still. I was begging them to leave me alone. Don't shoot me. I got to go home to see about my baby. Mm-hmm. I remember that real good. I mean, they ain't said nothing about what they're going to do to me. They put me in the car, then went blindfold me. But tied my head up, keep me from knowing which way I went. And they were talking about killing me. I had on white shirts. I remember that. They had on white shirts. One of them was Lawrence Lee's boy. Well, they didn't try to do nothing to me in the car. It made me get out the car. They called us, they were going to lay me down, have sex with me. Ooh, I cried at night, trying to get away from them. They wouldn't let me go. I can't help but tell the truth. What they done to me.
Sheep pie, where your little lamb? Way down in the valley. Birds and the butterflies picking at his eye. And the poor little thing he cried, Mama, Mama's gone, Papa's gone. They shall bring some horses, white and black, speckled and gray, all them pretty little horses.
My mother got sick, back when I was a baby, and she died when I was 13 months old. And strangely enough, you can ask Recy this. She called Recy to the bed and said that she was going to die, and she wanted her to take care of her baby, and I was a baby. And Recy took care of me from then on.
Family life was pretty rough for us because we had lost our mother. I used to sit and cry a lot because I didn't have a mother. But other than that, my sister and them, they took care of us, looked after us, and made sure we had food and everything to eat. And Reese, she used to carry Robert all the time. He almost broke her down, carry him. She used to just carry him on her hip all the time.
Well, I was in the bed, and Miss Fanny Down, after they kidnapped Recy, she came back from down where this happened up to our house. She first stopped out there to the Will Cook, which was the police, and told them. Then she come over and told us, and we all woke up. My father got dressed, and me and my sister Alma stood on the porch. The whole time this was going on, we both was crying, because we heard the guy had a gun. We just knew they was gonna kill her.
My daddy reached up, and the gun was on the wall. My daddy reached up and got the gun and come out the door. He was barefooted and didn't have no shoes or anything on. So he was just walking up and down the road. He did that clean until she returned. And me and my baby brother, we were standing on the porch, and we were just crying. And we thought that they were going to kill her.
And after they finished with her, they brought her back almost into town and put her out. And my father was walking everywhere looking for her. He had been to 2 other lovers' lanes here, and he was walking so till his shirt was wet with sweat because he didn't know where they took her to. And he saw a shadow of somebody about 4 blocks away. And turned out that was Recy they had brought back, and she come running down to where he was. And she put her arms around him, held on to him for a while. And shortly after that, Louis Corbett, the police showed up. Louis Corbett, who Recy worked for, that lived right next to her, he was a sheriff. He was supposed to have been out looking for her, but I'm not sure what he was doing very much looking. He just happened to come by Recy, and my father on the street picked him up and got him in the car and brought him back down to 3 Point across the street from our house. Reese had promised these guys down there if they didn't kill her and let her go home to her child, she wouldn't tell anybody. As soon as she got back, she told everything that she could tell. Everything. Described the car, and Louis Corbett knew who car it was, but it was Hugo Wilson. He had a green Chevrolet. He was only about, I said, 2 football fields away from our house where he lived. Just down the street, he could have yelled down there and got him. Meanwhile, me and my sister Alma was standing on the porch, and we could hear everything was being said over there. So they went and got Hugo and brought him there and asked Recy to look at this guy and see if he was one of the guys. And Recy said, yes, he's one. And he called her alive right there. Say he haven't seen her before in his life. But he had to be wrong about that because Recy passed his house all the time. Recy didn't live very far from him. He knew her and knew her husband too. And so Willie Guy came up where Recy was and he embraced her. But she didn't have too many words to say that particular night. She mostly was just crying and upset. Those young boys felt like they can do it and get away with it. They really felt like they could. They knew nothing was gonna happen to them.
What they did to her. And you know, my sister didn't have any more kids after that. And never got pregnant after that. And they didn't only just have sex with her after they got through mutilating her. They played in her body.
And if my life is like the dust, ooh, that hides the glow of a rose.
The reason so many people got away with it, I think they felt that the black woman's body didn't belong to her.
But what good am I? What good am I? Heaven only knows.
White men have had access to black women forcibly. If they wanted one, they would get them. It was something that their fathers, grandfathers taught them. The attitudes of the treatment of black women was the same as it was on the plantation. I don't think with the rape case of Aunt Recy was that unusual because, first of all, they did not regard black people as humans, first of all. This goes back to the plantation. We were animals, monkeys. And so they felt that we were really not human beings. So this attitude transcended from the plantation even to the day, if you will, because there are some white males, who still do not believe that we are human beings, that we are animals, and so therefore, so you kill an animal, you kill a dog. It's no different. By having the power to have sex with black women when they wanted to, they were in control.
Run, yeah, black woman. And sit on daddy's knee. Well, I'm got something to tell you, pretty mama. Don't you holler, please.
Even on the plantation, for what I understand is that young white boys would go to the slave quarters when he come of age and got ready to engage in sex, and he would go down and pick him out a woman to have sex with, and even to have children with if necessary. It was just common here in the South, whether it was on the plantation or on the sharecroppers' farms. It was just something common that happened here. Intimidation was one thing that was used to keep black men under control and then have access to black women. If a black man even dreamed about a white woman, he better not even tell it. But here it is, the white males could go and come into your house or come by and blow the horn, and your woman go out to the car and get there and leave with him and come back an hour or two later. You know, the black men knew what was happening, but for survival purposes. This is the attitude that was prevalent throughout the South.
Probably some slave owners felt that they could have their will with a female slave since they owned the slave. And I'm sure in some instances that was consensual type of an affair. But in those days, an old saying used to be in these parts that every white man had another woman in every crossroads, white and black.
My father started walking backwards and forwards because he was so mad and upset with him. But for what they had did to her, he was just walking backwards and forwards. And me and Robert, we started walking backwards and forwards behind him, you know.
I don't know if she was feeling pain or what. That was after they kept her about 4 or 5 hours down in the woods. 7 guys one night. It said they wanted her to act just like she was in bed with her husband. She knew Hugo Wilson. She knew Billy Howard and Luther Lee. But I'm not sure the rest of them she knew. And they went out to try to round up the rest of those boys, but they never brought in the rest of them, only Hugo. These same boys used to hang out in town square there. It's an old bank. That's where they hung out on the steps of it. You go through town at night, they'd be sitting there. From what I understand, 2 or 3 of those guys came back to that hangout spot that night when the rape took place. I don't think they bothered with those boys until the next morning. Recy and her husband spent the rest of the night at my house, and then they went back home that Monday, and that's when they was firebomb. Set the porch on fire, but Recy's husband was able to put it out. They moved in with us the next day. We got a lot of threats in those days. Just behind our house, we had a tall tree. It was a chinaberry tree, and high up in the tree there was a limb like a Y. My father would stay in the house until he knew we was all in bed, and he would sneak out back and go up that tree. He didn't want us to know that he was sleeping in that tree. He had a shotgun, double-barrel shotgun, and he would sit up in that tree at night and guard the house. During the day, he would sit on the porch a lot, and we had some hedges there that concealed the porch on one side of the house. And he kept his gun laying right there in front of him. He was always had that gun right there. He would have done something with that gun, but he felt that he had to still lie to protect his family. So otherwise, he would have done something terrible. I know he would have. As a matter of fact, he told me he would have.
Mr. Louis Corbett, he was the sheriff then. He was trying to make my father take his gun back to the house. He said, because you get in trouble if you try to kill somebody. But my father didn't. He, my daddy would tell us, don't be afraid. There's nobody's going to hurt you long as I'm living. Nobody's going to hurt you.
He loved his family to death. Oh, he loved his family. I believe that's the reason he didn't do anything to try to get revenge against them boys, because he felt that he had to still lie to protect us. One day we were fishing, and he told me, he said, you know, I could have got 5 of those guys at one night. I said, what guys? It's the guy that raped my daughter. Louis Corbett, he had the same name as we have. We got the Corbett name from Louis Corbett family after slave was freed, so they owned my ancestors. He come to our house and said, don't say anything, don't say a word. He was always saying that. Don't talk to anybody about it. And we just, every time he said that, we talk as much as we can. I don't know if it was my father or somebody was contacting the NAACP representative here in Abbeville. That's how Rosa Parks came in.
Recy Taylor isn't the first Black woman that Rosa Parks goes to after a sexual assault. This is the work that she's doing prior to the Montgomery bus boycott. She's an investigator. So when these cases and calls come into the NAACP, they send her out.
She wasn't in our house no more than 15 minutes before Louis Corbett showed up.
People know who Rosa Parks is, because when Rosa goes to interview Recy that first time, the county sheriff, is rolling by the house. Drives by, and then finally busts into the cabin and says, get out of here.
He come in the house during this and told her she had to leave and to get out of town. So she left, and 2 weeks later, she came back. And this time he come in, he was rugged. He bust in the house, grabbed Rosa Parks by the arm and pulled her out on the porch and wouldn't allow her to come down the steps. We had 3 steps on our porch. And he just pulled her from the high part all the way down on the ground. Rosa Parks went down on her knees, fell out in the yard. Then he told her to get out in town, that she'd come back, he was gonna put her in jail and keep her there. She left.
Rosa leaves, but she's not intimidated. She comes back, right? And she comes back, and on the second visit, the sheriff comes again, and they physically throw her out of the house. And this is not unusual. Rosa, of course, would know to expect that if a white sheriff comes in, he's gonna ultimately put his hands on her. But I also think it reveals something about her, too. That for the sheriff to come in and to throw her out the steps implies that Rosa was resistant.
I am old pilgrim of sorrow, tossed in this wide world alone.
We can link this up to her refusal to give up her seat on the bus, that there is a claim that she's making, and it's a bodily claim, to be able to own a space, whether that's Recy's kitchen table or this seat on the bus, that she wants and believes that she has a right to be in that space. In her actions, she is saying, you're not going to put your foot on my neck, you know, and I will be back. You can throw me down the steps, you can yank me off of this bus, but I am not going to concede my rights. I'm not going to concede Recy's rights. That's one of the things that makes Rosa exceptional, that she was willing to risk her life. Black women know when they're arrested and they're taken into a jail, anything could happen, and they may not come out. And if they do come out, they're going to come out in many ways as victims of police brutality. It's a place that she knows. It's where her family's from. Her father's side of the family is there. She still has relatives in Abbeville, and so she goes there. So it's personal in some ways. And I think she also understands at a sort of gut level what it means to be a victim of sexual assault.
In the late spring of 1931, I was past my 18th birthday. It was during the Depression, and I was quite lucky to have a maid-of-all-work job in the home of a couple who paid me $4 weekly for 7 days a week. The Mr. and Mrs. were off for their night of pleasure. The baby was put to bed by me, and he was sleeping. It was a typical hot Alabama night. All the doors and windows were open. I saw Mr. Charlie. He poured himself a drink from the whiskey bottle on the table. He stood near me, sipping a drink. I said the folks may be coming back soon if he wanted to wait for them. He said he was there to see me. He moved nearer to me and put his hand on my waist. At his touch, I jumped away as quickly as an unbridled filly. He asked me not to be afraid. He would not hurt me. He liked me. He didn't want me to be lonely, and would I be sweet to him? He had money to give me for accepting his attentions. I felt filthy and stripped naked of any shred of decency. In a flash of movement, I was no longer a decent, self-respecting teenage girl, but a flesh pot, a strumpet to be bargained for and parceled out as a commodity. He was fast becoming intoxicated on alcohol and lustful desire for my body. I knew that no matter what happened, I would never yield to this white man's bestiality. I was ready and willing to die, but give any consent. Never. All my fear had been replaced by a determination to stand completely alone against this formidable foe as long as I drew the breath of life. I talked about the white man's inhumane treatment of the Negro, how I hated all white people, especially him. He asked me to give him a price. I was not for sale. I asked him if the white woman was not good enough for him. I taunted him about the supposed white supremacy, the white man's law drawing the color line of segregation. I said there was nothing he could do to get my consent. He need not think that because he was a low-down, dirty dog of a white man and I was a poor, defenseless, helpless colored girl that he could run over me. If he wanted to kill me and rape a dead body, he was welcome. But he would have to kill me first. He said the color of a person didn't matter to him if he liked the person. I said it would not matter to me if there was no color line and all people could be respected equally. I would not be intimate with a man that the law did not permit me to be married to and respected by. At long last, Mr. Charlie got the idea that I meant no. Very definitely, no. He said he would not bother me any further. I picked up the newspaper, opened it wide, holding it where I couldn't see him, and started reading.
Most women know that their cases aren't going to be believed, so they don't tell their stories. Rosa doesn't tell her story. She writes her story at some point much later. It's an unspeakable crime, and people use that language to talk about sexual assault because they don't want people to speak about it. I can't imagine having to experience that. I can't imagine what it would take for someone to tell that story publicly. So there's no way that you can't hear Recy's story and not feel like she's a hero.
We all got ready that day and was going to come uptown and listen to the hearing. We got almost up to the courthouse, and the police stopped us and told us we couldn't go any further. We had to stay right there. They wouldn't allow any blacks into town that day. They brought Recy into the courthouse, and they didn't take her into a courtroom, but she was in a little back small room. That's where they talked with her. But she wasn't faced with them. They had her in one room and those guys in another room. She said she never saw the guys there in the courthouse. They didn't have Reese up there very long before they let her go. She'd come back down and join us. We all walked back to 3 Point. He was one of the biggest cover-ups.
I thought sure they would have found him guilty of it, you know. But I should have known better, because back in them days, they covered it up, cover up stuff so bad and put it off on black people, just how, you know, that they the one that caused it, they the one done it. And they knew, and they knew that those guys was wrong. They knew that they did that, but they wasn't gonna do nothing about it.
How you learn to stay in your place? You just do it automatic. You know the consequence of it. If you got out of your place, you'd probably be hurt, beat up, put in jail or something like that. And we all know where our places was.
I remember one time that I was uptown, and a policeman was coming through a door. He had his mother with him. And he slapped me because I didn't move back. I didn't move so that they could come through. I was going in the door, and he was coming out of the 5 and 10 cent store door, and he slapped me. And that's when I slapped him back. And we fought. And then that's first time I've been to jail and the last time I've been to jail. Somebody went and told my father about what happened, and he came down there, and I was up in the jailhouse, and I was looking out the window at him. He says, "What are you doing up there? Didn't you know better?" I said, "Well, Daddy, he slapped me, and I hit him back." Daddy said, "You don't go to town no more if you don't know how to act." Well,
I'm gonna buy a paper doll that I can call my own, a doll that other fellows cannot steal. I'd rather have a paper doll to call my own than have a fickle-minded real-life girl. I guess I had $1 million or more.
As a young boy, the only theater was the Archer Theater. We would fill our pockets with rocks. And when the lights would go out, we would take the rocks out, we'd throw them down and hit people on the head. And pardon the expression, but they would say, "Niggas throwing rocks." The whites would sit downstairs in nice chairs, but we would spit down on people's heads. We had our way of fighting Jim Crow as kids.
And it's tough to love a doll that's not your own. I'm through with all of them. I'll never fall again. Say, boy.
Any strangers who came into Abbeville, if they were black, they were suspicious that they were there to look into Recy Taylor and see what we were plotting. So that when I did go, I had someone drive me from Birmingham to Abbeville, go in a back entrance. She was traumatized, like she was in shock. When I first met her, we embraced, and I told her we were going to fight to make sure that justice was won. I took her case back to Birmingham, to the Southern Negro Youth Congress. And we made that one of our major projects, using her as an example of what happened to so many black women who didn't speak up. or were afraid to speak up. It was dangerous for all blacks, but particularly for women. Women were often attacked like Recy Taylor, raped or sometimes disappeared. One would have to be careful about what time of day that they walked. Young girls were very much aware of this. Even going to and from school, particularly in rural areas, they had to make sure to not be in a car alone. Recy Taylor obviously was a very strong woman who spoke up and therefore influenced many other women. The first thing I did was start writing press releases about her case to be distributed in all of the black press. Also sent it to the regular press, but it just wasn't published. She was surrounded by people who wanted to get her out of there, including Rosa Parks. Rosa took Recy to Montgomery.
Wait, come on, come on, come on. Don't you wanna go? Wait, come on, come on, come on. Don't you wanna go? Well, come on, come on, come on. Don't you wanna go? Yes, I want to go. Well, the ship is at the landing.
Rosa Parks put into a boarding house. That's what it was called in those days. I remember she was on Johnson Street. It was in the 500 block. She was there with her baby and her husband. The three of them was there.
Well, the ship is heavy loaded. Well, the ship is heavy loaded.
They had her there to keep out of sight of these guys. They were afraid they might try to do something to her. And the time she was up there, we had hardly no communication with her at all. As a matter of fact, they didn't want anybody to know where she was. Rosa Parks did. She was protecting her.
Yes, I want to go.
Orange juice or water?
Well, the tea is fine.
I'll heat it up for you.
Okay.
What year did you join the ACT?
It's in December of 1943.
And from the time you joined to the time you became the secretary?
On the first day I joined.
You were the secretary?
But see, that what happened that when I went to the meeting, it was going to be their annual election day. So I paid my membership. And then they had election of officers.
How many people were there?
I guess about 10, between a dozen and 15, just a few, and I was the only woman there.
So you're going to be the secretary because you're a woman.
Well, no, they just said they needed a secretary. And I think the only reason I was too timid to say no, and I just started taking minutes. That was the way I was elected secretary.
She didn't just come out of nowhere. People are introduced to Rosa Parks for the first time. She's Rosa who didn't give up her seat on the bus. They already imagine her as this elderly stateswoman, right? With her beautiful silver gray hair. But she was actually quite young. She had a long history of protests and grassroots organizing. She learned how to be an activist through her family and her family politics. Her grandfather, in particular, was a role model for her. He was someone who would not tolerate oppression and believed that his children and his children's children shouldn't have to submit to white supremacy. She'd already been to Highlander School and had training on how do you engage in public protest. So it wasn't a long leap for her to join the NAACP and begin to fight for civil rights for Black people in the South. The Committee for Equal Justice for Mrs. Recy Taylor. Rosa Parks doesn't serve on the committee, but she creates an environment where the people in the community come together. They are the leaders of their destiny. That's something Black women bring to the movement at every level. The press is going to be a key tool. Getting their story out there, the more people who know, the better it is for their case. And they also know the South. The South does not respond well to outside press, right? So if they can get that story out there, and that's why the sheriff is there from get-go. He doesn't want Rosa to leave with that story because he knows what it means for that story to leave Abbeville, right? It means that people are going to come in, there's going to be investigations, there's going to be pressure, and that they're going to have to defend their actions. Rosa Parks is operating from a place where rape is a crime. The rape of a Black woman is legally a crime, even if custom and tradition doesn't allow for that. With Recy's case, we see she gets a hearing, but it's not a fair hearing. And they understand that it's going through the motions. And then when that hearing comes to a close, we don't get justice for Recy. So what does the committee want next? They want a fair hearing, right? So it's like they beat that horse. We want a fair hearing. And the only way to get that is to pressure. Through letter writing, through the press.
Most events happening in Black life were not published in the daily papers. The major newspapers in the country and major magazines didn't mention it. The only place we really were able to publish articles about Recy and others was through the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Amsterdam News, the Baltimore, etc., through the Black press.
The Black press is a protest paper. It's trying to counter what the white press is publishing. It is a lifeline for the movement. It's how you get people to join the movement. It's how you get people to understand that their issues are connected. So what happens in Montgomery matters in Mississippi. It's going to make a huge difference once it's on the national radar, because in the South, there is a culture of silence. What happened to Recy? How common is this? What can we do as a community to publicize this, to ensure that Recy is going to have justice, so that her case just doesn't disappear?
The Committee for Equal Justice was largely waging a publicity campaign and trying to shame the state of Alabama for their failure to really properly investigate and prosecute her case. What they ask people to do is send letters to the governor demanding an investigation, demanding a trial. And they send postcards and petitions to hold the assailants accountable by the thousands. And these postcards come from all over the country. So the newspapers are really instrumental in spreading the story. And then the committee itself is really instrumental in getting people to send in petitions and postcards. There's a massive Harlem rally for Recy Taylor at the Hotel Teresa, which is one of these sort of iconic hotels in Harlem that Muhammad Ali would stay at and others. And they hold a rally for Recy Taylor in the ballroom. And hundreds of people come, people from all walks of the Black freedom movement in the 1940s, leftists, communists, liberals, progressives. They're all there, and they all chip in money to help spread the word of the terror that is in Alabama. It's part of the kind of infrastructure of injustice where the white press ignores these kinds of crimes, and then there's no record of them happening, which gives judges and juries plausible deniability of any knowledge. And maybe this is a rumor, it's not even in the newspaper. And that's why it's so important that the Black press publishes these stories.
This is a long tradition from Frederick Douglass's newspaper to Ida B. Wells, that Black people understand that the press is a weapon. They might not be able to assault somebody with a gun and get justice, but that the pen is a weapon, that if we can narrate our stories, then we actually have a chance.
They have no feeling for a colored girl, Peter. No, not a speck. When one of us even walks past on the street, they whistle and say all kinds of things out loud, just as if we weren't there at all. They don't care. We're just colored women.
Race films taking on white supremacy is very similar to the Black press. You have Oscar Michaud's Within Our Gates targeting lynching and sexual assault. It plays with both the lynching of a family, a Black woman and a Black man, and also the sexual assault of a biracial woman who actually turns out to be the daughter of the man who's trying to rape her. Race films made for Black audiences were popular because they got to see a diversity of Black characters, who's not the Sambo or the Jezebel. Black people felt like it was more authentic, even if it was fictional. They wanted to see that without the white gaze. If we go back to slavery and what Black women could claim, right? They couldn't claim legal recourse. There were no laws in place that would protect them. Recy's case is one of the first that pushes equal access to the courts. They go back to the governor and they say, we want another hearing. And they pressure, and they pressure.
It's that pressure from outside the state, from New York and California and Michigan, from labor unions and longshoremen, auto workers from all around the country. It's their petitions for justice that finally moved Governor Chauncey Sparks to hire private investigators to go to Abbeville to see what really happened.
She has witnesses. She has the woman and her son who are walking with her from the church. They report her abduction right away. The police are there when her father and her husband find her staggering down the street. It's hard to not believe Recy. It's very easy for the sheriff not to do anything about it without question, but you know that he knows, and everybody knows what happened, and everybody knows she's not a prostitute. This is about us being able to hear, and the stories that people are willing to tell, and they have the courage to tell. Recy is part of a longer tradition of Black women saying, this is not right, that not only do we deserve protection, but we deserve justice. Rape is this universal thing that women suffer, regardless of age, race, religion, sexual orientation. What I think is going to be interesting to think about is the way the legal system fails women regularly.
December 27, 1944, supplemental report regarding the alleged ravishing of Recy Taylor, Abbeville, Alabama, by 7 white boys on the night of September 3rd. Report submitted by John O. Harris, Assistant Attorney General. Upon arrival in Abbeville, we contacted the sheriff. In his first statement, he told investigators that this Negro was nothing but a whore and that he had on 1 or 2 occasions incarcerated her, but he now says that he has never arrested her and committed her to jail for any offense. He further stated that he has never had any trouble with her or her husband, and that their reputation is as good as any Negroes in that community. The sheriff stated that he arrested all of the boys, but it is our offhanded opinion that the sheriff never actually placed any of these defendants under arrest. We decided to interview each boy alleged to have had intercourse with Recy Taylor. We first talked to Dillard York. York stated that he would tell all he knew.
I'll tell all I know.
And he said that he got in Wilson's car
in front of the Abbey Theater about 10 o'clock the night she was picked up. I had been to the picture show, and when I went to the car, Hugo Wilson and Herbert Lovett were in the car, and we rode around town for a little while, and then picked up Billy Howerton, Robert Gamble, Luther Lee, and Joe Culpepper on the corner of the Northcutt drugstore. We started out on the highway leading toward 3 Points and picked her up. We did not have her in mind, as I had never seen her before, but I thought Billy Howerton knew her. I heard Lovett ask her if she was going or not, and she said she would go. There was no gun in the car, and no one put a gun on her. When we got to the place where we had intercourse with her, Lovett asked her to undress, and she undressed willingly and without protest. Lovett had intercourse with her first, me next, Wilson next, Lee next, Culpepper next, and Gamble last. We all took off our pants and underwear and left the top to our underwear on. All of us used rubbers. She did not say anything during the time all of us had intercourse with her, and she was undressed except for her shoes and stockings. We let her rest between the acts of intercourse, and each time she was asked if she was ready before another boy had intercourse with her. After we were all dressed, Lovett went to each boy collecting money from all of us and paid her. He asked her if she was satisfied, and she said she was satisfied, and Lovett asked her if she was going to say anything about it, and she told him she would not say anything about it. We then got in the car and put her out at the street light. We walked uptown and sat on the corner at the bank for about 5 minutes. This was the first time I had ever had anything to do with a Negro woman. I saw Recy Taylor at the courthouse during the grand jury investigation and recognized her as being the woman that me and the other boys took off that night.
The next boy we talked to was Robert Gamble, and his statement is substantially the same as that given by Dillard York. Next boy interviewed by us was Luther Lee. Lee stated that they proceeded on to the place where
we had intercourse. While there, I heard Recy say something about her baby and that she had to go home. Lovett is the one that told her to undress. All of us had intercourse with her except Billy Howerton, and Howerton said he did not want to have intercourse with her because the Negro knew him. We talked with Billy Howerton. He was reluctant to give us any information, but finally said he would tell all he knew, and his statement corroborates the statements of York, Gamble, and Lee in all material aspects.
I will tell all I know.
He stated that he did not see a blindfold on the face of Recy Taylor.
I did not see a blindfold on the face of Recy Taylor, but there could have been one there.
He further stated that he did not have intercourse.
I did not have intercourse with Recy Taylor. I did not want to have intercourse with her, and I told the other boys that I knew Recy Taylor, but in truth and in fact, I did not know her, but just made that statement to them because I did not want to have anything to do with her.
The next one we talked to was Willie Joe Culpepper. He stated that he got in the automobile in the town of Abbeville.
Got in the automobile in the town of Abbeville with the other boys, and we were talking about getting a woman. And we rode out on the highway toward Dothan and saw 2 women and a man walking along the highway. We went down the road and turned around and came back and stopped the automobile. Herbert Lovett had a shotgun. In a few seconds, Recy Taylor came to the automobile with Herbert Lovett behind her with the shotgun in his hand. Just before we got in the automobile, I heard Recy Taylor asking the Negro woman and Negro man, one or the other, to come and go with her, and they said they could not go. Herbert Lovett made her get out of the car, and we had the gun on her and told her to undress, and she was crying and asking us to let her go home to her husband and baby. When it was all over and each of us dressed, as did Recy Taylor, someone, I do not know who, put a blindfold on Recy's face.
And he took hold of himself hurriedly and said,
While she was having intercourse with Herbert Lovett, we walked over there to where she lay on the ground, and we placed some money in her hand. Hugo Wilson was the driver of the automobile.
Hugo Wilson denied
I had
that he had
nothing
anything
to do with Recy Taylor on that night stated by the other boys. I was not present. I know nothing in the world about it. I was arrested the night of September 3rd, and while in the automobile with the sheriff, Recy Taylor was called to the automobile and asked by the sheriff if I was one of the boys, and she said, yes, he is one of them. I told her she was a damn liar. The sheriff is a liar when he says that I gave him the names of the other 6 boys. All the other boys are liars when they say that I was there at the time the rest of them had intercourse with Recy Taylor, and that they were lying when
The
they
next
said that
and last boy we talked to was Herbert Lovett. He was in the Army. Lovett stated that he knew nothing,
of the affair for which I am being interrogated. I do know I was placed under bond, but I was never arrested for this matter.
Each of the boys that did make a statement about this affair stated that they did not know Recy Taylor before this night, and that none of them ever remembered having seen her. Recy Taylor stated to us that she could not identify any of these boys, and if they were all put into a lineup with 8, 12, or 15 boys, she could not go in and pick out a single one that picked her up that night and ravished her. Respectfully submitted, John O. Harris, Assistant Attorney General.
It doesn't take much to get an indictment. It's a one-sided story. So what I mean by that is when you go to the grand jury, it's secret. The state only calls their witnesses. It's not like the defense attorneys get to cross-examine during the grand jury process. It doesn't work like that. The district attorney at the time, a solicitor, I think is what they call, actually took the case to the grand jury twice. And